Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I am so glad you joined me for this last message in my series on four Proverbs. This Sunday, I'll be talking about bettering ourselves, and it comes from Proverbs Chapter 15, verses 16 through 18. Proverbs can be a bit of a struggle for us at times because of many different things. Part of it is that we need to understand that Solomon, in writing the Proverbs, was likely writing the first 7 Proverbs for his son Rehoboam. It may have been for his other sons, but I think probably Rehoboam was the target for that. Rehoboam would prove Solomon's concerns by his own errors and mistakes as a young man and later as a king. He leaves for us 3 principles in Proverbs that I think he would have wished to have left for his son Rehoboam. Rehoboam would make some serious mistakes in his life, and those mistakes would involve 3 errors that we see in our modern culture as well. If we were to look at Proverbs chapter 15, beginning with verse 16, we read these words: "Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention." I thought about 3 ideas that Solomon shares here with us, and I'm going to put them more in a positive spin for us. The concept in verse 16 is that we need to reverence God. We live in a culture that has lost a sense of reverence for God, and that's true not only of our broader culture, but that is also true of our Christian culture in particularly the United States. We tend to not take God very seriously in our Christian churches, and as a result of that, we don't view him as the Hebrew people viewed him in the Old Testament. The concept of an almighty creator who made everything that is and has power over life and death. Jesus would tell us, as his disciples, that we need to fear him who can not only take our lives, but send us into eternal punishment for our sins. And that concept of fear or reverence toward God has been lost in our culture. We unfortunately often treat God in our Christian circles as a big buddy in the sky, or we treat him even worse as a servant who gives us what we want, and sort of a genie in the bottle, if you will. And there is something very sad and sick in that view of God, especially when we recognize him as the creator of all that is, the one who has the right to set the rules. And so there has been lost in our culture that sense of reverence. The second principle or idea that Solomon shares here is the idea of our relationship with our family and friends, and the need for a positive relationship with our family and friends. What we see in our modern culture over the last 4 generations particularly is a breakdown of this concept of relationships and keeping strong and healthy relationships with family and close friends, treating them with respect and honor, and giving them the attention that is due that family member or that friend. how we treat our family and our friends is critical. And I thought about that in relationship to many of the wealthy young people and people from powerful families who grow up with a sense of entitlement and a sense of doing what they want, and they even display an antipathy toward their parents and toward their friends that is unhealthy and destructive. And that spreads out into the general culture of our times. And that is a sad thing. For us, if we are to maintain a healthy society, we need to have strong relationships with family and friends. And if we don't have those strong relationships, then the next problem that Solomon addresses becomes a part of our culture. That is, that we lose a sense of civility. And he talks about that hot-tempered person that just kind of goes around stirring up trouble wherever they're at. They aren't civil toward anybody. They don't treat anybody with honor. They don't treat anybody in a respectful manner. They do not view anybody as valuable beyond themselves. When we lose that civility in our culture, then we are headed to ultimate destruction and dissolution as a culture. Solomon shares that all three of these ideas are central to maintaining a strong culture and society. And he tells us that it all begins really with a reverence for who God is. When we have a reverence for him, then it changes the way we see everything else. It changes our concept of who we are and what responsibilities that we have. I thought about that in the situations that I have looked at as a pastor. And as a pastor, we very often see the results of a loss of these three ideas. We see people's lives broken apart and families broken apart. And we see people that have animosity in their friendships that go on for decades. And I have dealt with those kinds of things where friends have stopped caring about one another and have become angry and literally brutal toward one another. And that has gone on decade after decade, and that is sorry and sorrowful. And then I have watched as young people in our culture have been set adrift, and at times it breaks my heart because I watch them and understand the devastation that they're going to have. And then I've watched as even older people have developed an uncivil attitude toward people in our culture, especially with people they disagree with. And they don't treat them with any kind of respect or honor or understand their own failings and struggles. And that comes to really destroy things. You cannot have a culture hold together when that happens. Rehoboam had very deep antipathy toward his father, and if you read his story in First Chronicles and First Kings, you'll come to understand that he grew up in the shadow of his father Solomon and had great animosity toward him personally. And it also led to great animosity toward the community around him, and he treated them with contempt. But ultimately, his real problem was that he didn't like God. He had no reverence for God, and that would show in his life, as it says of him, that he was a man who did not follow God and did not intend to follow God. We find those things, those three patterns, flowing through dysfunctional cultures. And I really believe that unless that changes in our culture, we will have the same kinds of problems and destructions that we read about in the scriptures and we have seen throughout human history. I hope not. I do believe that those things can be turned around, but I do believe that those three things are critical. We need to have reverence for God. We need to have caring and honoring relationships with family and friends, and we need to have civil relationships with the general society. And if we do those kinds of things, if we allow them to happen, then our culture will get better. Thank you for listening. God bless you. You have a wonderful, wonderful week.